good evening to you, wherever you are and however you're watching us. This is TV3. Welcome to your authoritative current affairs program, Agenda. My name is Matilda Asante, and I'm sure you've heard all the talk back and forth about whether the Ghanaian economy is healthy or sick, and who is blaming who for what, and how that is likely to impact on the electoral promises based on which you voted. Well, we're going to have a chat tonight with the longest-serving finance minister in Ghana. Hopefully he will bring some experience and perspectives to the current economic situation, but also to the general politicking that is going on in the country. I'm sure you've heard all the talk about structural adjustment. Does that sound familiar? Economic recovery program. And there's one called PAMSCAD, whose initials I'll get him to, or is an acronym, so I'll get him to explain to us what exactly that meant. But also you'll be familiar with all our workings and flirtations with the Bretton Woods institutions. Have they done us any good, and should we still be dealing with them, especially in the light of the latest report from the World Bank talking about the health of the Ghanaian economy? Wondering who my guest is? Well, tonight we'll have a one-on-one with Dr. or Professor, I'll ask him in a moment which one he prefers, Kwesi Botchwey. He was finance minister between 1982 and 1995. 13 years of being finance minister. In a moment you get to hear from him, but right now I'd like to acknowledge Hosen Curtis for my shirt. Locate them at Jowlu Last Chance near Jofat Hospital. They're also located on the Spintex Road, and you can give them a ring on 027-310-7070, 027-310-7070. So good evening to you, Doctor, Professor, which would you prefer?
Uncle Kwesi will be just fine.
Uncle Kwesi. Okay, that's interesting revelation. So we'll proceed from there on then.
Okay.
Where have you been?
I have been in the States pretty much since I left office in 1995. I was at Harvard at the Center for International Development for about 5 years. Then I went to Colombia for a brief spell. Came back here to contest the candidacy, the presidential candidacy of the party, and then I went back, and I'm now at the Fletcher School at Tufts University in the United States, in a town called Medford.
What are you doing there?
I teach.
What do you teach?
I teach a course in economics. It's entitled Managing Economic Reform in Low-Income Countries.
Okay, like our own. So this is just perfect conversation for you then, because it
Well,
falls right within your turf.
I hope it's useful. Yes.
So that's where you have been.
That's where I've been.
We've just
yes.
come out of an election, and we're still in a transition process. Have you been following that process?
Yes, indeed. I was actually here during the elections and during the runoff. I left shortly after the runoff because I had to get back before the new year. So yes, I witnessed all the drama and the excitement.
You were not running away fearing that something could go wrong?
No, I had this abiding kind of faith in the good sense of Ghanaians. I have to say though, it was just a trifle too much excitement for me at some point. And yes, there was a point when I worried a little bit that perhaps there might be some too much tension and violence. So yes, I'm sure like all Ghanaians, there were moments when we all kind of prayed and hoped that everything would be fine. But I left immensely proud that we overcame these difficulties, and that in the end there was a compromise. The necessary compromises were made, and the concession made, and the change has come. So I'm proud that things worked out. I mean, anywhere else in our region or in the continent, quite likely there would have been some untoward development. So I guess we can't pat ourselves on the back that our institutions worked just fine. The judiciary worked, the electoral commission worked, almost impeccably. But above all, the people of the country conducted themselves in exemplary fashion for the most part, I'd say.
And did you have to yourself play any role personally?
Oh, I'm just a little fry, but to the extent that I could, yes, I tried to, talk to those that I could reach and so on to make sure that we put the national interest ahead of everything else.
It's interesting that we're talking to you about finance because you contested on the NDC's ticket to be flag bearer, and perhaps if you
many years ago.
Oh, so you could have been the president on the ticket of your party then, if that is still your party.
Well, I mean, if I had been nominated, my party's candidate, when I sought the candidacy, yes, I would have been the party's candidate, but this time around I wasn't. But I think, we're all lucky. The nation is lucky to have a new president in the person of Professor Mills. He was a classmate of mine and a colleague. He's a very principled and dedicated person, and I think that the nation is blessed to have him at the helm of affairs.
You say that you're classmates and all, so you're probably just as old as he is. Do you still have ambitions of becoming president sometime?
Oh, no. I gave those ambitions up long ago. I'd really basically just like to be Kwesi Botchwey, enjoying the rest of my life.
Why is that? For somebody who was in public service for 13 years, you would think that you've got such a wealth of experience that you could still put at the disposal of the state.
Well, I have had some experience, but so have many other people. And I would, of course, I like to consider myself as a consummate patriot, and of course I'd be still keenly interested in how the country develops, and of course I'd be available to offer advice and counsel when it's needed or sought. But there are fresh, talents, faces in the NDC, in both parties, I would say, and I think it's good to give new talents, the opportunity to serve, and let the rest of us old dogs kind of sit in the background a bit and perhaps advise on the back room.
It's interesting that you say that, because if you look at your party's transition team, a lot of your colleagues from the PNDC, NDC regime have also found themselves within the transition. You could have just as well been there. Were you approached, for instance?
No, I wasn't here. I wasn't approached, no. But,
would you have liked to be part of it?
No.
Why?
Because, I think that there are people. I haven't been here, for the past several years. There are people who've been here on the ground, working in much closer touch with what is happening. I think they deserve to be on the transition team. I have been a little detached from things, so I didn't expect to be on the transition team. But you said something about the composition of the transition team. I think it's an important team. A new party is coming to power. You need a good mix of experienced people and new faces, and I think that the team that has been announced has a good mix of old and new.
How do you think the transition is going from an observer's perspective, since you're not within it? That's assuming that you don't get briefed on how things are going inside.
Well, as I said, I left shortly after the runoff. But I've been following things these days, of course, thanks to the internet and so on. You can literally, I listen to the radio stations. I follow what you do here, in the studios. So yes, I've been following things. I think that the transition has gone reasonably well. People have to be a little patient with these things. It's a complex process, these transitions. Even in the United States, things haven't gone entirely perfectly. There are hitches here and there. I think that by and large the work has gone on smoothly. I've read bits and pieces about, some fussing about cars and so on. But these are little incidents. I think people should focus on the larger picture and not blow up, isolated incidents that may have caused some discomfort and so on, and just focus on the bigger picture. And I think that overall the transition appears to be going well.
You talked about patience, and just yesterday, the founder of the NDC, which is the party in government, called a news conference at which he seemed very disappointed and upset with the president within less than, a week of his administration, that he was being soft on the government which had just gone past.
I honestly didn't see it. I have no idea what he said. So I'm
That's a summary I just gave you.
Yeah, I'm not really in a position to comment. I didn't see it, and I don't know the context in which the comments were made, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on them.
So
I just arrived, actually, and you guys
we grabbed you
managed to kind of
How long have you been in Accra since you...
I got back, I don't know, Tuesday night or so. I don't know, Emily, your colleague, I frankly don't even know how she knew, your producer. I had no idea. I didn't know how she knew I was in town, and she called, and I picked it, which I normally don't do, and there she was. So I've been here just briefly for a couple of days.
Have you spoken to Mr. Rollins since you've been here then?
No, but if he grants me the opportunity, I would before I leave.
Are you on good terms with him?
Absolutely.
I've heard that some of the people who worked with him for years are not on talking terms with him.
Well, we worked together for many, many years, and these things happen. There were tensions in the group, and it happens in every party. So yes, there was some disaffection, some alienation, but I trust that much of that is a thing of the past now. And yes, my relations with the founder are cordial.
All right, stay with us. This is Agenda on TV3. My name is Matilda Asante. My guest in the studio, Uncle Kwesi, but his name is Doctor or Professor, whichever you choose to use, Kwesi Botchwey, Finance Minister of Ghana for 13 years, between 1982 and 1995. We'll take a short break, return and talk some economics with him, structural adjustment, economic recovery now, poverty reduction and growth facility. Yeah. We'll go into that. Stay with us. We'll be right back. You're welcome back to Agenda on TV3. We're chatting up Uncle Kwesi, as he chooses to be called, Professor or Dr. Kwesi Botchwey, former finance minister. When you were a finance minister, did you have economic planning attached to it as well?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was finance and economic planning together.
So what economic planning did you do for Ghana whilst you were minister for 13 years? Looks like we've been like a yo-yo back and forth since you've been gone.
Well, I don't know about yo-yoing, but over the 13 years that I was finance minister, naturally a lot of things happened. 13 years is a very long time. Many people now, I think, have forgotten what the economy was like in 1982 when we started. I don't know if you remember any conditions that, the conditions that prevailed then.
I remember us queuing to buy kenke. That's all I remember.
Well, that's a good enough index of the enormity and the gravity of the crisis we faced.
Uncooked, that was.
Yes, people actually queued up to buy uncooked kenke. People stood in articulated trucks to travel long distances, and we're grateful to get, access to get even that kind of transportation. Bushfires raged in the country. We were on the brink of, just national disintegration virtually. There were shortages of virtually everything. Most of the banks were virtually bankrupt. We were really in a deep financial crisis, and inflation was running at upwards of 120%.
Almost like Zimbabwe, perhaps?
Well, no.
Worse off?
No, I don't think there's any country that can rival Zimbabwe right now. No, we're nowhere near Zimbabwe, but bad enough for us as a country. We had large arrears of debt. We owed Nigeria, almost $600 million in oil taken and consumed and not paid for, as a result of which they kind of cut our supplies. In the midst of that crisis, we suffered a sudden 10% increase in our population when 1 million Ghanaians who had fled
to go to Nigeria.
To go to Nigeria mostly, and then a bit to Cote d'Ivoire, seeking greener pastures, were suddenly brought back to the country at the height of a drought and famine and a financial collapse. So those were the conditions in which we started the program and clawed our way back to macroeconomic stability, which we achieved largely by the beginning of the 90s. restoring macroeconomic stability was very important, bringing down interest rates, raising the rate of growth, balancing the budget, and restoring stability, providing incentives for people to work and save and invest. And then also, again, people have forgotten this, but we undertook a very massive restructuring of our institutions. Many of the things we see now and largely take for granted, with the forest bureaus, the city wasn't convertible then. The rate was fixed. We started the process of liberalizing the economy, opening it up, making the exchange rate fully market determined, establishing an interbank market, and destroying the black market essentially, and eventually setting up these forest bureaus, which are now everywhere in the country. The civil service reform started in our time, a massive program of infrastructure investment, capital markets, the stock exchange, all these things were done in our time. We undertook a very massive program of financial sector reforms. As I said,
FinSub, it was called.
They were called FinSub, in which we cleaned up the balance sheets of the banks. Most of them were near bankruptcy, frankly. Most of them were suffering the kind of problems that international banks are suffering today. They were, they carried very large non-performing assets, and basically, as I said, were near bankruptcy. So we had to establish a new prudential environment, subject the banks to a new economic system and environment for the banks to operate in, and recapitalize them. Even the central bank itself needed to be salvaged and recapitalized at the time. So apart from restoring macroeconomic balance, restoring growth, bringing down inflation, we also laid the foundations of a modern liberal economy in those years.
There's a lot of talk since I've practiced journalism and I started following finance and economic planning about macroeconomic stability, how the inflation rate has to be single digit and how lending and borrowing rates have to come down. And somehow, even in the present, we're still fixated on that.
On those things, yes.
What do they mean? I mean, why should we care? How does that translate for the ordinary person into money in their pockets, into a good standard of living?
Well, that's always an interesting issue to discuss. I mean, we must have every profession develops its own terminology and indicators to work with. We have to have some ways of determining whether in the realm of the economy we are doing well or not. One of the ways in which we do it is to see whether we are growing as a nation, whether our gross domestic product grows annually or whether it declines. It gives us a general measure of how well we are doing. So yeah, GDP growth is important. It's just the growth in the total goods and services produced as a nation. Inflation is important because it is an indirect tax on what you earn. The rate at which prices rise is critically important. The macroeconomic situation is balanced when the rate of growth is reasonably high, inflation is low, and businessmen and industries can borrow money at sensible rates. So macroeconomic stability is important. It's important also that as a country we should have reserves that cover a reasonable number of months of imports. So these are broad indicators of stability. When you have inflation running at, I don't know, in the billions and so on, as the meltdown in Zimbabwe, people pay for it. So these indicators are not just a matter of academic interest. They are prudent ways of assessing and measuring what people feel in real life.
There's a controversy brewing, an economic controversy, if I can call it that, brewing as of now, because the World Bank issued a report suggesting that the previous government spent over 13% of GDP. So they had a deficit, basically. They spent more than they earned, 13% more from my understanding. And there's today, the minority in Parliament, which is the government, which has just gone past, called a news conference, gave us indicators that inflation rate is low, or compared to when they took power in 2000. I'll just give you some figures real quick. They said inflation as of December, according to the Statistical Service, was 18.1. Economic growth, in terms of growth of the economy, was 3.7 in 2000. It's 6.6% as of December. Exchange rate, the cedi had depreciated in 2000 when they took power by 49.8%. Now it's 20.1%. Interest rates were lower. They cite the 91-day Treasury bill, which was 38%. Today, as of December, 24.7%. In terms of, what you talk about, macroeconomic indicators, sounds like a fantastic decline. And yet, their party is in opposition because people just thought, well, you may have all those statistics, it didn't reflect in my pocket. So are those things relevant to us? And how can you convince the ordinary person that it is?
Well, let me start from what you call the brewing controversy between the parties, and what I also see is a certain sort of public, rising public upset with the bank for sort of
with the
World Bank. And I gather some opposition and other people have even begun to impugn the motives of the institution of the World Bank in putting this sort of quote-unquote gloomy picture out. Let me just clarify what I think are the facts. The matters which the World Bank country director put out in the economic outlook on Ghana recently have been known and have been in the public domain for a long time. So it is, I don't think it is correct to suggest that somehow the bank is been, and the fund, I guess by implication, have been quiet, the IMF, have been quiet for a long time, or maybe even praised the government, the NPP government, and are suddenly saying something sort of different. The fund conducts what we call the Article 4 consultations with countries.
What is that?
These are consultations in which the fund would come. We don't have a program with the fund now, and people have to understand that. There's nothing we are doing now which we are doing.
The International Monetary Fund.
Yes. There's nothing we are doing now which we are doing at the behest of the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. We don't have a formal program.
So we don't have those traditional fears and conditionalities.
No, the old paradigm in which you had these conditionalities has changed somewhat. But the point I'm making, though, is not so much about conditionalities. I'm saying we don't have a formal program with the fund. But the larger point I want to make is that it is not entirely correct to suggest that these matters have been put out in the public domain for the first time.
Because you believe that they have always been.
I don't believe it's a
fact. They have always
it's
been
a fact.
Available.
It's a fact that if you read the
So why should the World Bank make
if you
a
read
big
the
deal
report of the Article 4 consultations, that the last one conducted with the government, I think in October or so last year, all these matters were discussed. The fact that so that's one. I mean, it is not just a sudden thing. Now, the bank.
When you say that, when you say that a government has overspent over 13% of its GDP, what does that mean?
Well, I was coming to that. Unfortunately, this debate tends to get politicized all the time.
So depoliticize it first.
So I think it's important that it be depoliticized. Yes, there has been growth. I think that the NPP administration must be congratulated for, stabilizing the macroeconomic environment. It is true that interest rates came down. It is true that inflation came down. It is true that growth surged. But it is also true that over the past year, especially, there has been a deterioration. I mean, that has to be admitted.
A deterioration.
Meaning that the deficit has grown.
Okay.
The national currency has tended to depreciate. It is true also that on our external accounts, it is true that there's pressure on imports, and it is true that our international reserves have gone down. Now, so, yes, there was improvement, but I think that both the bank and the fund and any professional who's looked at the economic performance record over the past year will have to admit that there has been a deterioration. Dr. Govind Nankani, who used to be a vice president for the World Bank and is now heading another organization, gave a lecture here some months back as part of the University of Ghana Economics Department Anniversary Series, in which he pointed out, and it was published in the Daily Graphic. Unfortunately, it didn't get very much traction. There was no national debate. But he pointed out these issues in even gloomier terms. I myself gave another one of those lectures in that lecture series, and I also pointed them out, quoting from these same sources. And the Article 4 consultation report that I'm talking about was the outcome of discussions between the fund and the government at the time, in October, in which all these issues were discussed. So I don't think there's any mischief in that. And while it is true that there has been progress in the past, it is also true that we have had a deterioration. Now you ask, what does deficit mean? Why should anybody care if we, you know, if the
especially considering the explanations that we have had, for instance, that you had a certain budget for crude oil, for instance, then out of the blue it skyrockets to 140 plus when your budget for it was below $100. How are you going to finance that? And the government traces part of the expenditure, for instance, to crude, but also to the energy sector. The World Bank cites the construction of stadia for, you know, Can 2008 or 2000, yeah, Can 2008. That is to be expected. I mean, if you're growing an economy, shouldn't you be spending as well?
Well, let's take the issues one by one. You ask an interesting question. Why should anybody care what the extent of your deficit is, and or even less how you finance it? Now, you know, the government is like an individual. If you live beyond your means as an individual, you are able to do so only either because somebody gives you money to make up the difference, or you steal it or something. You can't live beyond your means unless somebody is financing it, okay? And it's not sustainable unless you have somebody who is just constantly giving you, you know, the largesse to just live beyond your means. When you are a country, it's pretty much the same thing. The difference is that as a country, you can live beyond your means and just print money to make up the difference.
Or get loans.
Or get loans or grants or print money. Now, when as a nation we spend in expenditures, sensible expenditures if you like, much more than we collect in revenues, put it very, very simply, it wasn't the deficit, and it has a direct impact on your inflation. So a healthy macroeconomic environment is one that is characterized by low inflation, you know, reasonably low borrowing rates at any rate for businessmen who want to who want working capital and so on. So these are important, and the fact that our deficit has gone up so much over the past year.
Is this the highest that you have been aware of a deficit?
No, of course. As I told you, in 1982 when we started, it was over 120. But the point is that it's surged over the past year and appears to be poised to go up even higher in 2009, in part because of the demand pressures that we have seen on the economy that everybody acknowledges. Now, so that's the point. It's not a matter of you know, some partisan conflict in the World Bank. Why is the World Bank putting this out now, and it's mischief and so on? The truth is,
can you blame the people who would say that about the World Bank, though? Because I have covered World Bank country directors who would tell us how fantastic our economic performance was. I mean, in 1998, I think we even managed a single-digit inflation. And yet, by 2000, if I can just refer to this document I got today, we were at 40.5. So?
You know, as a nation, I think that it's important to conduct this debate dispassionately and to leave the World Bank and the fund out of it. The question is, there's not very much sense in shooting the messenger, I think leave the messenger aside. Let's ask ourselves, is what they are saying true? Forget who's saying it. Because these things have implications for the kind of policy mix we're going to have to adopt in the next 4 years.
Okay. Interesting.
You have to do, the new government will have to find the right mix of policies that would re-stabilize this macroeconomic environment. They have to look at the expenditure program and see whether all of it should be sustained, what they can cut or not cut. And then we have more pressure on the budget with salaries and wages increased. So the truth is that this new government will, together with the opposition in parliament, will, regardless of, forget the bank, what the bank is saying, that reality is there. So the issue which we're focusing on is what policy mix can we adopt now to deal with these demand pressures, because they are there. And the international economy is in a worse situation. So it's going to affect our remittances.
We'll come to that in a moment.
And all that.
So we'll come back. We have to take a break now.
Okay, so that's the important thing.
We'll come back and look at the implications of the current economic situation, how that could then impact on the promises that Professor Mills made to us, the basis of which he is President of Ghana today. Stay with us. We'll be right back. You're welcome back to Agenda on TV3. We're continuing our conversation with Uncle Kwesi, as he chooses to be called. We've talked about government or Ghana's deficit, Yes, so we have a deficit, but America has an even bigger deficit, and they're still a very good, strong, going economy. Perhaps not as strong as they used to be, but they're still quite a force.
So
why can't we also live our lives like that?
Unfortunately, we can't live our lives like that.
Why not?
Well, we are not the United States. We don't have a currency which is also international currency. But yes, you're right. The United States is the biggest debtor country in the world.
And yes, it's the most powerful too.
It is also the most powerful because the whole world helps the United States, in effect, to live beyond its means. When they have a huge deficit, they issue bonds, treasury bills, and so on. And we all buy them, okay?
Can we not do the same here?
No, if you did, nobody would buy it.
We issued index
I'm
bonds.
saying, if you lived so far beyond your means, as the United States is doing, yes, we issue treasury bills, people buy them. But if you run, a deficit in the trillions and decide to just issue treasury bills on the market, nobody will buy them with your cedi. In the United States, the dollar also has the advantage that it is in the medium of international currency, essentially, and it is what most people invest in. When they issue bonds to finance their deficit, we will buy them. China holds, a huge chunk of America's debt. Its implications for America's politics and so on is, just something else. But that's not the issue. We can't go that route, unfortunately, for us. But let me just wind up the conversation we were having before, very quickly, before we look at the
other issues that we have to discuss.
The other issue that we have to discuss. So as I was saying, the thing is for everybody to calm down, not see the issues that have been put in the public domain now frontally by this World Bank report and so on, not see it in any kind of partisan way, but let us ask ourselves, given this reality, and it is real, of this deterioration, which, by the way, yes, was caused in part by the fact that government undertook large expenditures, which were necessary, social, important investments. But the deterioration in the macroeconomic environment was also partly the result of policy slippages.
Such as?
Now, when you decide, for the best reasons in the world, to subsidize tariffs of electricity or water or fuel because people need some easing in their lives, that's fine. But so if you don't charge a price for the product, for the oil or for the electricity or for the water, which covers costs, then you are building up a hole. You know, you are digging a hole. Somebody has to pay for it. Okay, so the failure to apply adequate tariffs that cover costs, including
costs which, from the government's perspective,
yes,
the people of Ghana could not afford to pay.
Yeah, sure. I agree. The people of Ghana can't afford it. So you subsidize it, all right? But let's not forget the subsidy is money that you could have used in doing something else. Okay, so I'm saying it's important for people to understand all this will be put in the public domain. The point I was making simply is that the deficit isn't only the result of expenditures that we made which were necessary. They were also the result of policy slippages that may very well need correction. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. And all I'm saying is that just calm down and look at the situation calmly and decide on what policy mix will deal with it.
So we have those economic challenges in terms of the macroeconomic
and the fiscal,
and the fiscal policy side. But also, as we sit here, there's a world economic crisis. Some of our funds that we use to govern and to manage the affairs of the country are externally generated. Some are loans, but some are also grants. In the face of the economic crisis, how are we likely to be affected?
Well, again, I have heard comments from some of our policymakers and the central bank, not just here, but in many other African countries, all of them saying that somehow our economy will ride the storm, so to speak, is somehow resilient and will not be affected by the downturn in the economy. I'm not quite so sanguine. Obviously, it will affect us. Remittances, people working abroad who send monies in, if they lose their jobs abroad because of the economic downturn, obviously they're going to be sending in less and less money, and that's probably began to happen already. If there's less demand for our exports, gold, cocoa, bauxite, manganese, diamonds, if the prices go down because there's less, demand for them, obviously it'll affect our export earnings. Our access to capital markets may very well be affected, by this credit crunch, and aid flows may very well also go down as the industrialized countries feel the pinch. They are more likely to also reduce their purse. So we will be affected if the downturn continues and gets deeper. We're affected in the loss of aid flows, access to loans in the form of reduced export earnings, in the form of reduced remittances, and therefore it makes the correcting of the macroeconomic slippages that we've had, which we have to deal with, leaving aside who's to blame for it and so on, it makes it difficult because the external environment in which the corrections need to be made is itself deteriorating. It means that it's challenging. I think that's one of the points that the World Bank report was making, a point that all of us therefore should make ourselves. So.
But in spite of all that, we have discovered oil. Today, the managers of Cosmos Energy were at the castle to see the president. They talked about 2 billion barrels of oil, again, on condition that the business environment remains conducive. But at least there's some unexpected revenue which we're likely to get.
Yes, I know. I know many Ghanaians. Well, first of all, it's a good thing that we discovered oil. I hear many people when they look at this situation sounding as though this is some huge bonanza coming our way, which will help us just manage, the crisis, wade through the crisis. But I think it's important to put things in perspective. So.
But in spite of all that, we have discovered oil. Today, the managers of Cosmos Energy were at the castle to see the president. They talked about 2 billion barrels of oil, again, on condition that the business environment remains conducive. But at least there's some unexpected revenue which we're likely to get.
Yes, I know. I know many Ghanaians. Well, first of all, it's a good thing that we discovered oil. I hear many people, when they look at this situation, sounding as though this is some huge bonanza coming our way, which will help us just manage, the crisis, wade through the crisis. But I think it's important to put things in perspective. First of all, things are still unfolding, new finds and so on, and therefore the numbers and the estimates will need to be revisited. Let me say that to start with. But
revisited, suggesting that it will go higher, or that it will diminish?
Yeah, well, if there are new findings, and therefore the amount of oil we're going to be exporting goes up, and so obviously it'll affect things. So I'm saying that the estimates themselves may need to be revisited when the commercial quantities are ascertained and confirmed, and when production starts. First of all, the point needs to be made. This is not some huge bonanza which is going to make up for all the losses we have and solve all our problems. At the very best, from the figures that I've seen, and as I said, these are still being massaged and revised. First, production isn't going to start anyway till about 2010, 2011. And then on present trends, I guess the reserves may very well be entirely depleted by 2030. So the estimates we have suggest that on a cumulative basis, over this more or less about 20-year period, you're going to be having about 20 billion. Meaning that annually, $20 billion. Meaning that annually you have an increment in your revenue sources of about $1 billion a year over this 20-year period. Now that's not insignificant, but it's important to appreciate that that is about 10% of the budget. Okay, so it is not a huge bonanza. We are not suddenly a Saudi Arabia, all right? So yes, it will be significant. Yes, it will help us if we deploy the resources sensibly to spend more money and accelerate our pace, in achieving the development goals and so on. But it is not going to solve all our problems. In fact, it might even aggravate them. And the amount of money involved isn't such a huge thing. It's not going to solve our problems. As I said, may even make our problems worse. I mean, some of the hustling we've seen in politics and all the jostling and so on is in part just the smell of this oil.
Which is a good thing.
It's a good thing, can also be a horrible thing.
Okay, but in the light of first the world economic difficulties, that our oil money may not be coming in as soon as we anticipate that it would, and also because of what you call the slippages in our macroeconomic environment, can the Mills administration meet its electoral promises? I give you a couple of them. Talks about tax cuts is one of the promises they're making. Create jobs through economic growth, modernize agriculture and agro-processing. Can those be achieved under these economic circumstances?
Yes, they can be achieved.
I mean, can a government which is looking for money afford to cut taxes?
Well, obviously, in the rather parlous circumstances in which we find our fiscal situation, it would be irresponsible to cut taxes unless something else gives. Okay, if we cut taxes, but sort of raised revenue resources elsewhere, well, yes, it'll make sense. So the cutting of the taxes is certainly well-intentioned, but it'll have to be done in a context in which there are no severe expenditure cuts that make people's lives worse. So, of the things that you listed as
modernizing agriculture, we've been doing hoe and cutlass farming like forever.
Those are important and need to be done.
But how? With what money can that be done?
Yes. So you are right in asking the question, how does a government facing such a fiscal situation talk about cutting taxes? I think that's a legitimate question to raise. And my point was that surely cannot be done and should not be done unless in a context in which what is cut is more than compensated for by some other revenue flows. I don't know. But the modernization of agriculture, the stimulation of the economy,
to create jobs.
Those are not just, they are doable. There are challenges there as well because, one, you need investments. You need the right policy mix to provide the incentives that you want. If you're going to create jobs, for instance, access to credit, especially for small and medium-scale enterprises, is very, very critical. That is where most of the jobs will be created. And as we know, these are sectors that notoriously have difficulty in raising funds. And so one of the ways in which this might very well be facilitated would be to look at our credit institutions and see how we can expand credit and facilitate access to it, especially for the small and medium-scale enterprises. That said, there are many, many challenges. Everybody says that. Now, how it is actually done in practice, if the banks are in a terrible situation, obviously they can do this. Happily, our financial sector is in reasonably good shape so far. The banking sector is in reasonably good shape. But even there are worrying signs that we need to watch.
Such as what?
Such as the non-performing loans in these banks, the extent of non-performing assets in the banks is rising. It's not yet a huge problem, but it needs to be watched because if as a result of the economic downturn the world over, or even our own economic downturn, the businesses that have borrowed money from the banks can't pay the banks back, it's not going to do very much for the solvency of the bank themselves. I'm not saying this is a problem yet, but I'm saying that there are signs that this could be a problem, and we need to watch that. So they can be done. In agriculture, you're right. We are still basically a cutlass and hoe, agricultural country. We need to modernize agriculture. It can be done. Malawi.
Who will do it? Is it the government or the government?
It has to be the government,
sector?
and it has to be the government providing the right policy framework and incentives. It has to be the private sector responding. We need to revisit the whole business of access and pricing of fertilizer and inputs.
You're talking about subsidies?
Yes, absolutely. I think that is very important that we provide fertilizer, especially this input to farmers at a reasonably good price. I have no problem at all with subsidizing these inputs.
That's if we can afford it as a state.
Well, yeah, if we can, yes, if we can afford it. But I mean, it's an investment worth making. I think that one of the problems in the structural adjustment period was there was a certain a quick shift from just freeing, prices and withdrawing subsidies to agricultural inputs, including fertilizer.
So I get a regret in that then, from pursuing that policy at the time that you did as finance minister?
Well, we pursued some of that policy. Looking back, I would say that it was not the best policy to pursue. We were constrained to do so because we didn't have the resources to fund the subsidies.
Again, on the advice of the World Bank?
Not so much, on the advice of the bank. I mean, we fought very hard in these negotiations, especially in the area of agriculture. We conceded and reduced those subsidies, in part because we couldn't fund them, and also in part because of the conditions in which these resources came.
Okay.
But now, countries can, if they so wish, subsidize, these inputs. You have to remember, though, that when you are subsidizing these inputs, there's a cost to you.
Yes.
So you've got to make sure that the farmers that are getting these subsidized fertilizer, if your relative price framework isn't very good, the farmers who are getting this subsidized fertilizer, if they carry it outside and sell it and and export it and flog it, you're not doing very well. So there are issues. It's not easy.
In the light of the obvious possible economic challenges that confront this government, what financing options, with the benefit of your experience, would you recommend they adopt? What should they do?
Well, let me express my own humility. I can't say that I have all the answers.
I'm sure you have some.
I have some, yes. Clearly, we need to do a very rigorous analysis of the fiscal situation. There are many other sources of financing. We need to rehabilitate our revenue institutions and ensure that revenue collection, mobilization, internal mobilization is improved. The president himself is an expert in this. He was the head of the IRS for many years. There's a challenge there. Revenue performance has been reasonably good, but there's still room for improvement. So we need to work on raising revenues, clearly. We will need access to external funding to supplement our own internal revenue generation. When the oil comes through years from now, it will help. We need to establish a macroeconomic environment that will enable us also to borrow from the capital markets. So the money has to come from internal domestic sources through revenue mobilization, supplemented by loans. And if you are going to borrow money, the cheapest loans we can get, let us be clear, would be loans from the World Bank. That's the cheapest. These are and the African Development Bank, the multilateral institutions. And so yes, we would need to maintain our access to this funding, and then and install the kind of policy framework that we believe will provide the stability we need and also improve our competitiveness.
My producer's just signaling to me that we're out of time, but in the light of the proposals that you have made then, would you like perhaps, should the president approach you and say, well, you seem to know an awful lot with your experience, would you like to come and advise me in my government? Would you take up the position?
I don't think the president should do any such thing. There's a lot of youthful talent, new faces,
But there's also a lot of experience that you could bring to the table.
True. But I'm saying there are many young people here in the country, outside and so on, that the president can tap. Yes, we have the experience. I'd be much happier staying in the background, providing advice in the back room, and letting fresh new blood take the hassle and lose their hair, as I did mine in the 13 years that I was in office.
Okay, finally, I promised our viewers that you are going to explain to us what the acronym PAMSCAD means. What exactly was it?
PAMSCAD was a program we adopted during the structural adjustment period to compensate for some of the social costs of the adjustment. It was called a program of action to mitigate the social cost of adjustment. Okay. That's a cumbersome name.
Coming from, with the help of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, you coined that, I'm sure.
Yes, it was done jointly. I don't remember who exactly coined the acronym, but there was a lot of ownership, national initiative in the evolution of the structural adjustment.
If we were to coin one that we can use for our current economic circumstance, do you want to hazard a guess? What could it be?
PAMSCAD would be just fine.
Okay, interesting there. That was Professor or Dr. Kwesi Botchwey, or Uncle Kwesi, as he chooses to be called. He was our guest today on Agenda Talking Economics and also a bit of politics. Many thanks to you for coming. My name is Matilda Asante. Many thanks to Hosen Curtis for sponsorship of my shirt. You can call them on 027-310-7070. I believe there's a lot more that we have to discuss in the weeks and months to come on our economy, the political promises, but also on your everyday life. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week.